Welcome back to Bisexual Killjoy, the place where we know bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. I'm Bailey, and this is...
Jace.
Jace?
Jace. In related things are different now news, do you remember that episode when I said I wasn't gonna cut my hair short because I didn't like how my face looked and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
So it turns out that I didn't need 5 years to give it a try.
Yeah, so I'm really happy that everyone knows because I already knew, and this whole season I've been like, don't, Lynn, Jace, no. They don't know yet. Anyway, the hair kit looks great. I love that the audience is on board. But after a full season of talking to experts about bi+ concerns, we're reflecting on what it means to connect on the basis of sexual identity. What does it mean to center bi+ness in your life, your research, your politics, your activism?
These past few months, I think, have been really insightful for the both of us. We've learned that there's just so much out there for us to find, all of these topics for us to cover, and so many people whose voices we want to have active conversations with and we want to continue being in conversation with. I'm very honored to say that most of those voices are all of you, our gentle listeners. The more topics we cover, the more we hear from you about all you want us to address and the kinds of insights you've gained from us two nerds just geeking out about bi+ history.
But we are more than nerds. Something I feel like we've both done in the past year is really grow in our activism. To think where we were in March and where we are now at the end of December, especially as we feel the weight and terror of the election results. And if you've gotten this far in the podcast and weren't able to discern our politics or the fact that we are political, I'm not really sure what you've been listening to, but I guess I'm happy to have you on the same page. Queerness in itself is inherently political, and I don't think we talk about that enough. Stonewall was not a picnic, and queer folks were not sent to summer camps during the Holocaust. Queer people have long since been demonized, and it is our responsibility to ourselves, to each other, and to our community to stand up where we can. And for us, that includes just a lot of education and community building. And we recognize that the only reason identity-based movements have achieved policy advancements is because of our commitment to fighting for all of our rights and protecting each other as we continue on our activism journey.
And here's what we want you to know. Bisexual Killjoy is a space where everyone is welcome and bigotry is absolutely not tolerated. We have put an enormous amount of effort into making sure that this is a brave space where we do not shy away from tough conversations and recognize that as humans, we have the ability to critique past and current systems, as well as change our minds when new information comes available. Every individual has a right to their own bodily autonomy and to determine how they wish to express themselves. We're strong advocates for self-determination, where everyone gets to live their life on their own terms without dictating anyone else's actions. We do not tolerate, defend, or justify intolerance of any sort, including deliberate ignorance. We ground ourselves in facts, science, and a critical understanding of how to foster compassionate relationships across all kinds of difference.
So with that said, I think I'd love to reflect on the work we have done in this past season, which was so different than season one, where it was just the two of us talking about things, laying down a groundwork. And as you and I have discussed a lot, if you pop into one of these episodes, we both think that you should listen to all of the episodes. And it's not just like, oh, we want to have even more than 10,000 downloads, which we hit just a few weeks ago.
We did!
Across the platforms. But because this work that we do layers itself, we are trying to give a foundational understanding of what it means to be bi+ in a social system that doesn't necessarily celebrate our complexity or the intersections that we represent. So with the beginning of season 2, we started off with the Bisexual Killjoy's return, where we were talking just about what we'd done over the summer and our goals for the rest of the season. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we just wanted to bring new voices in to shine a light on the complexities and the intersections that we don't have all the answers for. What would you say to that?
I think that yes, and for us as scholars, I think that's something that has really stood out for the both of us throughout our journey in school and outside of it in activism and scholarship, is that people don't know what to tell us when we say we're doing bi+ work.
Yeah.
People don't know how to react. And we've mentioned this, I think, in a few episodes in season 1, where so much of our understanding of bi+ness comes from people who aren't bi+. And I think that the reason that our work in this whole podcast continues to build up slowly, and it's not something that you can take out of context necessarily, has to do with us wanting to shed a really big spotlight. Like, it's not just a light, it's just the biggest spotlight that we can on this is a complex phenomenon. And we're experiencing oppression from so many different areas, but we also experience uniqueness in so many different areas. You can't just pick and choose whatever it is that suits you.
Yeah, I think especially when we were talking about the intersection of sexuality and gender, which we have continued to struggle with throughout the 2 seasons, where we had Rosie Nelson on the show to talk about bisexuality and gender fluidity. And that episode to me is so interesting because not only did Rosie give us a great crash course into gender fluidity and gender identity in its place in sexuality, but they also kind of messed up my understanding even more of what gender is.
Oh my God, Bailey, we should do a bonus episode. I'm going to give you flashcards and I'm going to say, Bailey, is this gender or sexuality? And you're going to go, I don't know.
I know. It's just me failing a quiz. Look, humiliation is not my kink, so I can't do that.
Yeah, I think being in conversation with all of these different folks has definitely allowed us to make this whole conversation even more complex and understand that bi+ness is even more complicated than we think it is.
And unfortunately, also uncovered the depths of inequity that bi+ people face, especially when we had that conversation with Rob Brooks Cohen about bi+ men and their double erasure that they face because of their gender identity. You see it in the research, you see it online, but then to have someone talk about the lived experience of bi erasure as a man, period. And then that sort of also spilled over into the conversation that we had with Leanne and Patricia and Alicia. It's just so complex. Bi people are erased at every level.
We are oppressed at every level. And I think that it's hard to wrap our minds around that. Sometimes I find it hard for me. I'm doing this work, I'm reading so much about it. It's hard for me to find myself in circles where it's like, right, work on bisexuality is not mainstream. It's not well known. It's actually really hidden in obscure journals.
Or relegated specifically to the Journal of Bisexuality, which I appreciate its existence. The fact, I think that every subsection should have its own journal, should have its own dedicated, but nobody knows about it except bisexual scholars, bisexual researchers.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely something to keep in mind. I do love that the Journal of Bisexuality doesn't have a word limit. I will say that that's something that has going for it really strong. But at the same time, it's definitely really strange. The fact that, I got accepted into this PhD program. I'm surrounded by sociologists all the time, and we all have such different interests. And it's so strange to be in a group with folks who are also doing LGBT studies. Then it's like, but my focus is on bisexuality.
Yeah.
And it's like they don't know what to do with me. They don't know what to do with my existence in and of itself. And it's like, I occupy a liminal space, my friend.
What has that experience been like for you as you have dived deeper into activism and gotten, not that you weren't serious about bi+ research before, but now I almost see your ship correcting and going in a different direction, which is very exciting to me because I feel like I got you. I pulled you over to the activism side. How has that impacted your experience in the classroom?
I definitely have a lot more opinions. And that's very strange to say because I used to have a lot of opinions before. I think that now it's very cool to see myself back it up with all the science that I have behind me. And I love that I get to interact with all of our listeners on such a regular basis, to hear from them, to hear from all of you who are listening in, because it definitely fuels my work, not just as an activist, but also as a scholar. And the way that I like to introduce myself is that my work focuses on sexuality more broadly, bisexuality specifically. But the more I dive into this work, it's like bisexuality has so much to offer. Bi+ identity has so much to offer that it doesn't even feel like a niche to me anymore. It feels like a whole field. Even though I will say that it's a little bit annoying because I've had folks who are like, Jace studies, I think like sex and pleasure. And it's like that too, but But there's like one thing that I do all the time, I promise.
Will you listen to me when I talk? I would love that. Really, this is why I have a podcast, because nobody listens to me.
Tea, honestly.
That to me is very relatable, this idea that because you and I get so deep into bi+ spaces, 1, 2, research, 3, activism, it does feel like my whole life. And then when you exit the bubble, and that bubble is honestly sometimes just me and you, it feels like, this actually, there are problems. We have problems in the bi+ community because nobody knows what the fuck I'm talking about. Nobody knows about health inequity. Nobody knows about social inequity. People are just trying to convince me that bisexuality is real. And I feel like I'm several chapters ahead of that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need that established, actually. I know that bisexuality is real. I know that plurisexuality is real. I know that, like, did you know that bi+ women are at higher risk for domestic violence from an intimate partner than straight women or lesbians? And they're like, no, but that can't possibly happen that much. And then I feel like a Debbie Downer because I've got like, here's the statistics on it. Oh, it's like 1 in 5. It's a very upsetting number. And I'm like, oh my God, that is an upset. And then I've ruined dinner. You know what I mean? Like, people start me going, and then all of a sudden I've talked about bisexuality for 45 minutes and realize kind of slowly, oh no, all of my social cues have been ruined by my plurisexuality.
I mean, I think that comes back to what it really means to be a killjoy, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to shame ourselves for doing this work, and we're not going to shame ourselves for having the answers to the questions that you're asking. Just because you didn't expect an answer doesn't mean I don't have one.
Oh, T.
And for a lot of bi+ folks, they find that we feel like we're the only bi+ person in the universe so very often.
Statistically unlikely.
Statistically unlikely, but it's been really interesting for me to have these conversations with bi+ folks who are like, yeah, I'm married and I have kids. I don't talk about my bisexuality really often, but now that I hear you talk about it, here are some of my experiences. And it's been really cool to just empathize profoundly and say, I want to talk your ear off about this because there are so many explanations that I can offer. I know we don't have the time because it's like the last 5 minutes of class. So I'm just going to direct you to the podcast. I promise you, listen to the podcast. It's going to provide insight, and then have them come back next class and be like, I listened and oh my God, that makes so much sense.
I know.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I know, friend. I can tell you that.
What you just said there about people in relationships thinking that they're the only bi+ person in the universe, I have to let you know, and if Leanne ever listens to this episode, how affirming the plurisexuality and polyamory episode was for me, because a lot of bi+ people who are in relationships are in monogamous relationships and they totally erase their sexuality because it's not important. That's in the sarcastic quotes because you can't see me right now. But it's like, no, it is. Your sexuality is important, and it is important to talk about, think about, work through with your partner for whatever that means for you. And I was like, damn, you mean that sexuality isn't just this passive thing that I do, that it is this active thing that is a part of me and I carry it around, and it's not my whole identity, but it is a part of me that deserves attention and care. I left that conversation feeling like, yeah, I am bisexual and I'm in a monogamous relationship. That doesn't change shit. This podcast isn't just good for all of you, which I assume it is because you keep tuning in, but it is also good for us, I feel. And I was happy to have those growth moments and those affirming moments this season. And I wanted to know, Jace, like, have you experienced anything like that from any of these episodes and guests?
You know, I think an episode that really touched me, besides the fact that this entire season has definitely been a dream come true, like I've gotten to talk to people that I didn't think I would ever get to talk about or with even.
Yeah.
Like that's really dope. It's also, I think, just been really enlightening in terms of how can my sexuality shape my work in all of these different ways, despite not being necessarily like the center of attention. And I think that Alicia marked that very much for me. Alicia's work does not necessarily focus on bi+ness the same way that ours does, where that's all we talk about. But hearing and listening to her say so much about how that has shaped her worldview, how she approaches relationships, how she approaches coalition building was definitely very insightful and left me just kind of like, yeah, my work is broadly applicable. My work does expand beyond bi+ness to also encompass liminality, to also encompass fluidity, to also encompass what it means to stand beside folks who don't necessarily embody the exact same things that I do.
Yeah.
And that was really definitely affirming, I think.
That Alicia episode really encouraged me to get my shit together next year because I have got some resting to do and some recuperating. But it was like, as you do coalition building, as you get more involved in activism, you have to realize how interconnected everybody is. So my bi+ community is also my disabled community. It's also my ace community. It's my trans community. It's so many things. And as a bi+ person, I can't just show up during Pride Month. I can't just show up and talk about bi+ people and their issues. Again, the sarcastic quotes that you can't see. But I have to think about every single level that bi+ people are impacted on. And that has to do with social justice. And that has to do with not just health and equity, but with poverty and with all of these other things. And as we wind down to the end of the season, I'm really thinking about how can I get involved in local politics? How can I get involved on my local community level so that I know that my neighbors are taken care of, even if they don't, like you just said, fit that perfect intersection the way that perhaps I do. But I've been doing a lot of thinking and growing and expanding over the last couple of months.
And I think that point really brings us back to how your sexuality, your bi+ness informs so much more than the romantic relationships that you find yourself in.
Yes.
For all of our monogamous folks who are already in a relationship, getting involved in a bi+ community, bi+ activism, in not just bi+, but other LGBT orgs and events and gatherings can be really healing and it can be really affirming in this very important part of who and what you are.
I love that you called out the bi+ monogamous people like me straight to my face. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I try.
But this wasn't for me, but I do know other bi+ people who listen to the podcast who have reached out to me personally and been like, wow, I really liked your episode about love, which was from season 1, Other Words That Start with B, where we talk about the different types of love. And I wanted to tell you, Jace, how much I love you and how much this podcast has given me not just an opportunity to grow as a person, but to grow as your friend and to be like, yeah, my understanding of love is so different and expansive, period, like it was before, but it just shows me how important community is and how we should take care of the people in our lives who bring us joy and bring us stability when life is really chaotic.
I agree with that. And I definitely feel the same way. I love you and I love all of our listeners. And I love that it is because of everybody tuning in. And it is because Bailey was like, yeah, we should start a podcast. That so many dreams have come true on this side. And we've done so many great things. We've gotten invited to speak.
I know.
I was talking about this with a friend not too long ago. I was like, I didn't think I would like this as much as I do. I didn't think it would fuel me as much as it does. But getting messages from everybody who's listening in, who has been, seeing the downloads go up, because I'm going to be super honest. My biggest fear was that we were going to be talking to a wall. What if we start this podcast and nobody listens? What's going to happen? But everybody is listening. Yeah. So many folks are tuning in. So many folks are getting what they need from all of this information. And it has been so fun to also be able to share with someone everything that I'm reading, because I have over 100 articles on bisexuality in my Zotero. I need somebody to talk about this with.
I know. You are making my vacation reading list just grow exponentially, and I can't figure out how to get PDFs on my Kindle, and I feel so old, and I'm not. Anyway, so I will be reading all of the things that you send me. I just haven't had any time.
I can find you the EPUBs.
Send me the EPUBs, please. Was that ASMR, everyone? Let's write us and let us know if that was EPUBs.
We can get Bailey to do ASMR.
But only on our Patreon that we're also working on over the Christmas break.
We're trying.
I know, we are. But also, just speaking of laughter and of joy, we've had some opportunities to talk about stories this season. We had 2 back-to-back, no, not back-to-back, but Patricia Silva, we had an episode about bi visibility in media. And then with Kat Calamia, we had preserving bi+ stories in comics. And those episodes to me were really interesting because with Patricia, we learned that there is this really rich history of bi+ representation in film specifically. And with Cat Calamia, how are we bringing bi+ stories into comics? How are we bringing them into the 21st century? And that made me say like, oh, well, what we're doing is important. This podcast is a piece of media. And by talking to each other and bringing on guests and also talking to our listeners who have sent us in some really good stories and questions over the last 6 months, you are contributing to bi+ history in this way. And that makes me happy. Not all the stories have been happy, but I'm happy that you felt brave enough to share them.
And I think that those stories keep us connected with each other in very meaningful ways. That's a really big reason why we started the Give It To Me Bi advice column on the Substack. Because so many bi+ folks out there feel like they're the only bi+ person in the world, sometimes we feel like we don't have anyone to speak to about these situations that come up, these conflicting feelings that come up. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to let you know that you're not alone. We're here to tell you that you're definitely not alone. We have felt something similar, very likely, and we're here to walk it with you.
We are. And I don't know if you saw the Gmail today, but we got a very nice note from a listener yesterday morning. And I'm just going to read it real quick because it's brief. And it says, "Thank you for the podcast. I must admit there are times that I'm snapping my fingers and there are times in which I am enraged, not at you or your guests, but at the injustice of it all, which is very real. In the theme of Thanksgiving, I am thankful that when I did a search for bi podcasts last year, not only did your podcast pop up, but I started listening." And we appreciate that. Thank you for letting us know because sometimes it's hard. We aren't just doing this to a wall. And yes, we see the 10,000 downloads and we know that people are listening, but it's hard to make this, especially when you're sitting in your room and I'm sitting in a closet, you know?
Yeah. Right now, the articles that I need to read for my finals are living rent-free in my head. It's tough.
And in the topic of joy and positivity, we recently met with Allison Cipriano, who is a more freshly minted PhD. And I love knowing that more people are getting their PhDs in bisexuality. So Jace, thank you for doing the work.
I try.
It's so important. You have no idea how important it is. And she was talking about bi positivity as a concept and how it could be an insulating factor. And I just kind of want to expand on that a little bit because the bi positivity is found with people. Yes, it is an internal thing that you want to do and develop yourself because that's what your therapist would want you to do, like finding joy. But you find joy with people and you have to find your community, especially as we go into a time of uncertainty or greater than usual uncertainty. And I don't think that for either of us, we'll be backing away from this podcast, but we'll probably be holding on to each other a little bit tighter as we figure out what is the protective role of bi positivity in our lives and how can we share it with each other and with our listeners.
And I think that it is a time to hold each other close. So for us doing this podcast, for all of our listeners, to find the spaces that affirm you. Mm-hmm. And that can be parasocial relationships like this podcast. It can be your local community, your friends. Find bi+ meetups on Meetup or on Eventbrite. And holding each other close. Now is not the time to hide and go further into the shadows. It is a time to find your people and create the support nets that you need to in order to remain strong.
So given that we are at the end of our second season and we have hit some very impressive milestones that we've already alluded to, but like we got booked for gigs this year and we hit the 10,000 downloads. But we do want to get back to some basics just so that we're all on the same page. So first and foremost, we need our listeners to understand what we mean when we say bi+. We've gotten some, people think, oh, you're saying bi+, you're erasing everything that lives under that. And we're not. For us, in most activist spaces, bi+ acts as an umbrella term to encompass all plurisexual and pluriromantic identities. And you might be sitting there wondering, why is an umbrella term important? So when a community like ours, which is huge, it's over half of the queer community in the United States, when a community like ours has a variety of labels, it can become easier to divide ourselves. And division has consequences. So when bisexuals, pansexuals, omnisexuals all kind of like get into their own corner and start pointing fingers like you're not me, so I'm not going to help you, that has consequences. And we already have the fewest amount of funding, bested only by asexuals, and have some of the worst healthcare disparities. And division can mean not just hurt feelings, but it can mean death, lack of access, lack of support. This is not the time for infighting. We need to leverage our strength in numbers in order to take care of the community as a whole.
It's important to remember what we learned from Alicia in her episode. Divide and conquer is a really successful and effective oppression tactic, and we cannot allow them to continue deploying it in such a blatant way, especially not us against each other. Mm-hmm. And for us, we believe in preserving bi+ history and bi+ stories. As a community, we recognize that we not only learn from the organized production of knowledge, but also through the embodied knowledge that we carry with us through our experiences. This is why it was so important for us to start the advice column on the Substack. It is so important for us to have each other as references, to know that we are not alone on this journey and that we have also been in similar spaces. So please remember to submit your own story if you have something you want to share.
And as a duo, we are committed to building solidarity and coalitions across groups through compassionate approaches informed by intersectionality, decoloniality, and liminality. And we do recognize that bi+ folks just don't exist in a vacuum informed solely by their bi+ identity, is what we were talking about earlier. As humans, we are shaped by many life experiences and are deliberately read by others based on their own understandings of the world. So by recovering and compiling bi+ narratives, we recognize bisexuality, and that includes all of the things underneath the bi+ umbrella, as a whole identity that does not need to be transitory, and to center those experiences of those who have been superimposed by monosexual narratives and deliberately choose to study the ways in which these oppressions are transformed at those various intersections.
So what does it mean for us to make bi+ness our life's work, or at the very least, the center of our advocacy? It means to resist. It means to resist the pressure put on us to pit bi+ folks against one another for the sake of keeping us down. It means to resist the urge to believe monosexuals' understandings of who and what bi+ people are and take that as truth, because it's not. Resist the temptation to assimilate into a normative, quote-unquote, queerness that does not recognize the transformative potential of liminal spaces. As scholars, activists, educators, we choose to center our bisexuality in order to resist any and all outside forces that would rather we assimilate, remain silent, or hate ourselves. We choose to center bi+ness as a strategy to promote self-care, resilience, and persistence in the face of doubt, erasure, and oppression. And we hope that this podcast inspires you to do the same.
So where do we go now? By the time we return to you, we will, in fact, be under a new administration here in the United States, and things could be very different. But in the meantime, here are some things that you can do to keep yourself safe, empowered, and engaged. First and foremost, I do not want you to despair. I don't want you to despair and think that nothing can be fixed, nothing can be good, that everything will be shit forever, because that's what they want you to do. They want you to despair and to crash out. So say fuck it and have hope. And I would, again, sort of consider, not just myself, but to encourage all of you to consider getting into local politics as either a runner, someone who's like running in local politics, or someone who's a supporter, because you don't have to be in the front stage to be a part of anything. And then create a safety plan. You might live in a very dangerous place as a queer person, and it might become important for you to figure out how to leave. And there are mutual aid funds out there. There are communities out there that can help you find safety. It might feel impossible because we live in a capitalistic hellscape that makes moving and leaving very, very difficult, but it's not impossible. So if you are out there and you don't know what to do, I would be happy to help get you plugged into those resources. So please email us. This is very practical. Review your will. Make sure that you have a will so that if anything happens to you, there is no question about who gets what, to make sure that your loved ones are taken care of. Similarly, review your health plan. Who has power of a medical attorney? Who has power of your life in their hands if something was to happen to you? I also want you to get invested. I need you to play the game in this capitalistic hell society, okay? Rich people aren't the only ones who can make money. And there are also resources out there for people who've never had money, like myself, to learn how to invest and to play the game a little bit so that you can just like, if those rich motherfuckers can get money, so can you. Anyway, I'm sorry, Jace. I'm just like, and another thing. The last one, though, is more practical and will allow you to, in fact, touch grass. I would love it if you figured out how to get involved in your local community garden or to plant your own food, because I don't know if you've Googled what a tariff is lately, but your grocery bill is probably going to go up and you should learn how to take care of your own food anyway. So that's all I'll say about that. So go ahead, Jace.
It's also really rewarding to take care of your own food. I miss doing that back home. Thank you all so much for joining us this season and helping us grow so quickly and making our dreams come true. Like, this would not be possible without you. We are planning a lot of stuff for you, so keep your eyes peeled. Make sure you stay tuned for everything that's coming up. For the most up-to-date news, follow us on Substack and on the Instagram. Rumor has it that we may have a Discord server soon.
And there's another rumor that we'll be back with season 3 in March. We have a huge laundry list of requests from you to go through, so do your best to support our work while we put together another stellar show for y'all.
Season 3 is in the works, and we are very excited for what's coming up next. What are we going to talk about? A few thousand things.
I know.
If we're going off by everything that you've sent us, a few gazillion things. And we really hope to center intersectionality in our next season. We find that it is always important, but especially right now, to understand the ways in which oppression transforms itself at these different intersections and why it's important to talk about it, why it's important to not forget those of us who find ourselves at these union points. And we will make sure that we are not forgotten.
Thank you so much for tuning into Bisexual Killjoy, where we do know that bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. To support us, share us with your friends, subscribe to our Substack, rate our podcast, preferably 5 stars. We want to hear from you. It's honestly the thing that sustains us. Share your stories with us on Instagram or via email at bisexualkilljoy@gmail.com. We would love to answer your questions in our advice column, Give It To Me Bi. So check out the Substack for more details on that. And until we meet again, keep being a bisexual killjoy.
Stay bisexual and stay strong.